Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of our Blender VFX tutorial series. Now in this part we're going to learn how to do some materials and some basic lighting for our scene. And I promise in the next episode of this series we'll actually deal with some visual effects, but I just kind of wanted to lay down some of the groundwork that you'll need to actually do some visual effects. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first thing that I always like to do is to get our lighting down in the scene. So let's go ahead and do that. Now what we can do is actually add in a HDRI, which is basically an image that has lighting data baked into it. So we can actually come here, then we can go to HDRI Haven. Now the link is down in the description if you want to go do this step with me. We can just search for an HDRI. We can see some of these that they offer. We can just scroll down, and I'm trying to go for like kind of a restaurant vibe, so I might actually just come to the top and search that. So let's see, restaurant. Okay, so we found this HDRI, so we can go here. We have the Bush restaurant. I'm just going to download. Let's actually go ahead and download the 8K version, just because that's we're actually going to be able to see the HDRI in this render. So once that is downloaded, we can come back inside Blender. Now to actually enable our HDRI, we can come up to the shading tab. Now we need to go down, instead of object, to shade the object, we want to shade the world. And then we can just add in a environment texture. I did Shift A to add that in, and then click that up to the background. And then we can just open up that file that we just downloaded. So mine is right here. So now if we go into the rendered view, we can actually see that throughout our world. Okay, so here is our HDRI into our scene. So that is looking pretty good. This is what we wanted. Okay, so now we can actually go ahead and set up our ground plane to basically be the table. So let's select one of these and then just hit period on our numpad like that. So that is looking good. Now we just need to add a plane. And actually one thing I'm going to do is actually set these to be in the center of our world. So let's just box select these, and then we can hit Shift S to go into this. And then we basically want to hit selection to cursor. And since our cursor is in the world origin, that is where it's going to be sent. So now we actually have both of our things in the center of our world, just so we can work with that a little bit easier. So now let's go to the side view. Let's go into wireframe so we can see our plane object. And we're just going to move that down ever so slightly, just so that both of our bottle and our wine glass is actually sitting on that floor plane. So now we need to basically set up the camera, get our basic composition down. So let's go into the material preview, and if you notice we can't really see our HDRI here. So what I usually like to do is come up to this tab, and then we can actually hit scene world, and that'll bring our HDRI into the material preview, just so we can view that a little bit easier. Now let's come to the layout to do this, since we will have a nicer little space to work with. So this is our camera. We can see that it's not really where we want it. Now there are many ways we can move our camera. One way that I always like to do is kind of position it roughly around where I want it to be. So I know I want it to be kind of here. And then what we can do is hold Control Alt and then press 0 on our numpad, and that will actually make the camera come to our view right here. Now if it's still not aligned, what you can do is hit N over here, and that'll bring up this little menu. You can also hit this little caret icon over here. And then we just want to go to the view tab and then camera to view. That'll basically lock the camera to wherever we're looking, so when we do the basic look around inside of Blender, we can actually see that the camera is following our path and everything, instead of going outside of our path inside of Blender. So basically I'm just gonna position it where I think I want it, so right around here should be good. And then we're just gonna unclick that lock camera to view. Okay, so we can hit N to get out of that again. And then we basically just want to start setting up our composition. So I'm going to hit G to move, Shift Z, every axis but the Z axis. So we'll put that there, and then the glass will be a little more up front, like that. We can also change around with our focal length. So let's select the camera, come here, and then we're going to make the focal length just a tad bit out. I'm thinking maybe a 35. For now, we might change it in a bit, and then in lock camera to view, we can just try to position that a little bit better, a little bit nicer in our scene, like that. So that is looking good. This is the one I'm going to stick with. Okay, so we have our basic composition now. Now we actually need to start doing every material in the scene. So basically I want this table to be a nice wood texture. This bottle, I want to have a label on it and to be bottle colored. And then this wine glass, we actually need to have glass on it. And the most important thing is that we're going to do some fingerprints on it to add that little bit more realism in our scene. So let's go ahead and do it. First thing, we can start with the glass. Go to the shading tab. This is where I do most of my materials and everything. Is just a nice layout for it. We can go back into object instead of world, since we're going to be dealing with our object. Period on our numpad to get back there. And basically, we just need to add a new material. We're going to call this wine glass, like that. And we can see that it gives us a principled BSDF into a material output for our default. We actually don't need this principled BSDF, since there is a nice other BSDF called the glass BSDF. So that is really nice. It'll basically give us exactly what we're looking for. It's a glass. You can see it looks kind of weird in the material preview, but that's just because that's how it's viewing it in the viewport. If we actually go into rendered view, you can see that actually nothing has changed, and that is actually because we are on Eevee. Eevee is basically the real-time render engine for Blender, whereas Blender is the more realistic ray tracing engine inside Blender. So let's come up here, go into the Cycles render engine, and for your device, you want to make sure you are on GPU compute. If you have one, CPU is fine, but GPU is always going to be faster. So now we can go into rendered view and see how that is looking like. Okay, so now you can see this is what we got for this. You can see that this is much more realistic looking compared to Eevee, and so that's always just something you want to watch out for when you switch over and everything. So here we actually have our glass and everything. We can see we have these weird artifacts in our glass already, and that is actually because we don't have it shaded smooth. So if we just right click, shade smooth, that should hopefully get rid of them. But if not, we can always mess around with the subdivision surface modifier that we have, because we haven't applied that yet. So that is looking good. Now we actually need to go ahead and add in some of the fingerprints. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and go to Google. I'm going to search up fingerprint roughness map. Now the link to the one I'm going to be using is in the description below if you want it. Okay, so this is the one I'm going to be using. You can, of course, download all my files I'm using down in the description below if you want to, but there is also a link if you want to do that as well. So we're just going to save that image as, locate wherever you want to put that, and then let's just save that right there and go back inside of Blender. Now we actually need to add in a image node, so let's add in image texture. Then we're just going to open up that image that we just created. So here's my image. I'm just going to open that up. Now we can shift control click to view that, kind of what that looks like on our thing. You will see that it kind of looks a bit weird. It doesn't look like fingerprints or anything. That's actually because our UV map is all wonky since we did our modeling. So basically you can think of UV maps as if you took the surface area of a object and laid it out flat across a piece of paper, and that tells Blender how the actual texture is going to be projected on the object and everything. So for this, it's very simple. Since we're only going to be viewing the glass from one direction, we can actually just go into the camera view by hitting 0. We do need to be in edit mode, so again, that's just tab on your keyboard. And then we actually need to hit A to select everything here. And then what we can do is hit U. Then we're going to come down to project from view, and basically project from view is going to take wherever our position of the camera is and project the texture directly on that. So now if we actually come over here, we're going to hold Control T to add the mapping and texture coordinate node, and then we're just going to add in a value node so we can control the scale individually, and then we can just scale this up. And now we can see that our fingerprints and everything actually look like they are on the glass and everything. You'll see I didn't select a tiled texture and everything, so that was actually my bad. We can just play around with this until we get this basic seam lost. So let's just push it up to a 3.8 is what I'm sticking with for my thing. It looks alright, maybe like that. So we can still see that there's this line, so let's just move the location in the Y up a bit until we can try to hide that as much as possible. So that's looking pretty good. We still have that seam, but since we're just going to be using this as a roughness map, it doesn't really matter. So next thing that we need to do is actually add this into our roughness of our glass. So let's plug the color into the roughness and then just give that a quick look. Let's zoom into this a bit, and you can actually see that we now have some smudges and everything on our glass. If you want to actually control the amount of smudges and stuff, we can go ahead and add in a color ramp node in between the two, and this will actually allow us to change around our smudges and everything, make them brighter or darker or whatever. For mine, I'm just going to make them a little bit more prominent, so just going to try to bring in those whites a little bit up, and then we can view that, and that looks a bit better. And basically just play around with it and get the style you want. There's no really good way to go about doing this. Okay, so I dialed in the roughness of my glass, so you can see that down here. So if you want to try to copy that if you want to. But now we can see that we actually have some fingerprints and everything on the glass, so that is looking really nice. And pretty realistic. It just adds a little bit of an imperfection in our scene, trying to ground it in reality. So next we can go ahead and move on to our bottle. We're just gonna quickly name this bottle like that. And for the bottle, it's a pretty easy process. You just want to choose whatever color you want. Mine's going to be a darker green, so I'm just going to do a darker green like that. For the roughness, we need the roughness down since we want it to be shinier. We do want a clear coat, just to add like a clear glassy type look. And then the transmission we're going to turn up too, because bottles actually let light through instead of being opaque. So that is pretty nice. Now you can mess around with some other stuff right here, but this is the basic effect that we're going for. And we do want to add those fingerprints into our bottle as well. Instead of doing that whole process again, we can actually select this thing. We're just going to select all this stuff over here, copy that by Control-C, and then Control-V to paste. And then we're just going to plug this color ramp into the roughness over here. And that should give us some fingerprints on our scene. Let's view that real quick. We actually need to go ahead and UV project it again. I forgot to do that. So again, just hit Tab, A to select everything, U to unwrap, and then project from view. So that is looking a bit better now. It's still looking a bit wonky, you can see here, and that's actually because of our subdivision surface modifier. So what we actually need to do is go ahead and hit right click Shade Smooth. And then we're just going to go ahead and apply our subdivision surface modifier. So just click this little caret and hit apply. And now it is applied and we can't mess around with it anymore. So again, hit Tab to go into edit mode, A to select everything, U project from view. So now that should have fixed it, so that is looking good. We can again play around with the scale because it's going to be a different scale for everything. Playing around with the scale right here, we do want to try to make the fingerprints just scale correctly and everything. So that looks pretty good. Ideally we would have a seamless texture and everything, but this is going to be fine for this tutorial. So let's actually view what that looks like. Okay, we can see some fingerprints and everything, but it's not as pronounced as I would like it. So let's actually crunch those a bit. Bring the blacks up and everything. It's very hard to see, so it's just a tiny bit of realism, but they are there. You can kind of see it in the reflections and everything here. So that's what I'm going to stick with for now. Now to actually create the label in the bottle, let's do that real quick. So to create the bottle, let's come out to layout view just so we can select the actual label and everything. So what we can do is, first of all, we're going to go into edit mode. So what we are going to do is come to the side view by hitting 1, and then we're basically going to go into wireframe. Then we're going to hit B to box select, and then we're basically just going to click and drag down here. And so that selected the whole side of this. We can see this is basically where I want our label to be. So now we basically need the label to be its own object. So I'm just going to hit Shift D. That'll basically duplicate this. And it's now separate from the actual bottle. And now what we need to do is hit P to separate by selection. So that'll basically make it its own object. So if we go out of edit mode and select this object right now, it's separate from the actual bottle object. So that is what we are looking for. And then all we need to do is kind of rotate that so we can actually see it in our scene. So let's just rotate on the Z like that. So that is looking good. And you might need to scale it out just a tad, just so it's not overlapping any geometry or anything. And then if you have this weird shading, we can come to the normals and hit auto smooth on, and that just fixes that kind of weird shading issue that goes on. Now you will notice that it still has the same material as our bottle, so we don't want that. Let's come to this. We're going to exit out of the bottle material just so we have a new material. So we can add that in. We're going to add in a image texture, and the material I use is down in the description if you want to go ahead and download that. It's just a simple label that I found on Google, so we're just going to open that up and see how that looks. So you will notice we're having that same issue where it's not projected correctly. So now we can actually see that it's not correctly aligned or anything, and we can actually mess around with this in the texture coordinates. But what I'm going to show you is to actually edit the UV. So let's come up here to the UV editing tab, and we can see all of this. Basically, this is going to show us our UV. So we have our texture over here, and then how it's being projected on the thing. So we can actually select this object. We're going to go to Tab to Edit Mode, and then we're just going to hit A. We do want to make sure we have one thing highlighted or whatever, because this is how it works for this specific method. Now we can hit U again, and instead of doing project from view or anything, in my testing I actually found that follow active quads actually works a lot better. So we're just going to hit OK. You basically just want to experiment with that until you find what works for you. And then if you can't really see the texture that much, we can actually hide the overlay by hitting that button up here. So now this is basically what we want and everything, so that is looking pretty good. But it is upside down and everything, so we can actually change that. We're going to come over here, hit A, that'll select all of these. Then we're just going to hit R to rotate on the X 180 degrees, and so that will flip it upside down. Now we basically just need to align this a bit better, so we're just going to hit G to move. It's all the same keybinds as in the 3D viewport, so that is really nice. So we just need to align that a bit better. So we see we have some area over here to work with. So what I'm going to do is hit S, and then we can scale on the X axis to just scale like that. And like that, that should be good enough. We don't really need the edges and everything. So here is our correctly UV actual label and everything. So that is looking good. Now we just need to come back into the shading to kind of finish it up a bit. So we will see that it kind of looks a bit plain right now. So let's actually add this in to the specular, and then our roughness, and that'll give us a little bit more detail, so that is looking a bit better. Finally, we have to do the table texture. So let's select our table. We're going to add a new material, call it table. Now for this part, you do want to make sure that you have the Node Wrangler add-on installed. So Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then you want to type in Node Wrangler. So you want to make sure that is checked down there. And then we actually need to go up and find a texture. So the site I like to use is Texture Haven. It's the same guys who make HDRI Haven. So that is really nice. I'm going to go up to Textures. Then we're looking for a wood texture, and kind of like a wood plank-ish texture. So I'm going to use this one right here. We can kind of see what that is going to look like. So what we need to do is hit all maps, and then I'm going to download the 4K PNG. That'll basically download the roughness maps, all that, the normal maps, all that stuff. So basically now we can go up into the downloads folder, and then it gives us this nice little zip right here. So we can just open that up, and there are all of the images we need. So let's actually come over here. We're going to make a new file for it. So let's type in wood. And then we can just drag and drop all of these into our new wood folder. Now you do need WinRAR or 7-zip to do what I'm doing, or you could just extract it. But WinRAR and 7-zip are what I'd recommend. So now we have all of our textures in one folder. So now with Node Wrangler installed, we can actually click on the Principal to BSDF, hold Shift Control and T, and then I'll bring up this menu. And then if we locate that file, so here is my wood folder, we can just open that up, hit A to select all these, and hit Principal Texture Setup, and that'll actually set up all of our textures that we need right off the bat. So that is looking pretty good. We actually can come to the top and kind of see what this is looking like a bit. So we can see that we actually have some normal map and all that stuff in. It doesn't look great, so we can always dial that in. First thing I always like to do is change this out from a normal map into a bump. I just find that bump nodes are a little bit easier to work with and look about the same as a normal map. So we can just plug that into there and then turn that strength down a bit. So that is looking pretty good now. We also need to dial in the roughness just because it's never going to be perfect. So you always want to try to dial it in based on how you want it to look in the scene. So just going to dial that in a tiny bit. So that is looking good. I will notice that we don't have any specular, and I always like to add some specular. So what I'm going to do, okay, so here is our roughness after the color map. So what I'm going to do is going to try to plug that into specular to see how that looks. We might need to mess around with that a little bit. So let's take it off. On. It just adds a little bit. And let's go into the camera view to see how this is looking like so far. You will see it's kind of low res, and so what we can do is we're going to come over here to the mapping section. And we're actually going to make this a little bit smaller, so add a value node into the scale. And then we're just going to play around with the scale until we get something that we like. So that looks pretty good and everything. It's not perfect, but this is just to kind of show you the beginning material setup that we're going to be using throughout this VFX tutorial series. So that is looking pretty good. Okay guys, so here is the result that we got with these settings and everything. We can see that our glass and our bottle look pretty good and everything. We can't really notice too many marks and stuff on the bottle, but the glass is looking pretty good. However, this table texture really isn't that great. Now if I was actually doing this for real, I would select another one or whatever, mess around with some other settings. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it like that. You can find other wood textures, but it's basically the same way that we did to set it up. Now the final thing that I want to add is to add some in-camera effects. So we can actually go select the camera in here, go to the camera properties, and we're basically just going to add in some depth of field and everything. So let's come out to the rendered view, just to kind of view what that is going to look like. Okay, so here it is. We can come down to the depth of field. Then we're going to make the focus object. We can make it that, our little wine glass. So that's looking good. You can see that it's really added a lot. Now if you want both of these in focus and everything, you can play around with the f-stop. Since we do have everything to scale and everything, it's actually kind of like actual photography and everything. You can mess around with the f-stop and everything. So I'm just going to change that up a tad. So this is the basic effect we have. We can add some more stuff if we wanted to, like in the compositing tab, we can add in like bokeh, something, you know, if you wanted to do a special type of thing. One thing I am going to add though is a denoise node. So I'm just going to come here, make sure that denoising is checked so we get all that more denoising data. Going to add in a denoise node, plug the noisy image to the image, normal to normal, and then the albedo to the albedo. Then plug this into the composite. Let's give that a final render. Okay guys, here we go. This is our final render for this part of our VFX tutorial series. This part I basically just did to actually do the materials and everything, and also the modeling, just to get you an introduction into edit mode and everything, since you'll be using that a lot in your visual effects and everything. So this is basically the basic groundwork to Blender and how to get photorealistic images and everything that we'll be using later to combine with video and make some sweet visual effects for you guys. In the future, we'll be doing more VFX related stuff, so make sure to like and subscribe for that. But anyways guys, we have a Discord and Patreon. The links to those are in the description. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.